Last week, I got news that completely changed my life. For a while, I'd been feeling off. Nothing major, just fatigue, a nagging cough, and this tightness in my chest that wouldn't go away. My wife, Megan, kept pushing me to see a doctor. I brushed it off at first, thinking it was just stress or allergies, but she wouldn't let it go. Eventually, I gave in and made the appointment. The doctor ran a series of tests, and I could tell something was wrong by the way he looked at me when the results came in. He sat me down and told me I had stage 4 lung cancer. I was stunned. I don't smoke, I eat well, and I'm not even 40 yet. I kept asking how this was possible, but he didn't have an answer. The cancer was aggressive, and while there were treatments that might give me more time, there was no cure. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Telling Megan was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. When I got home, she could see something was wrong immediately. I sat her down and told her everything. She broke down crying, clutching me like her life depended on it. She kept saying we'd get through it together, that she'd be with me every step of the way. I believed her, but that's not even the worst part of this story. A few days later, my business partner, Adam, came by to talk about some work stuff. Adam and I have been friends for years. We built our company from the ground up, and he's one of the few people I've always trusted. After everything that happened with the diagnosis, I told him the news. He was supportive, saying all the right things about how we'd figure things out and how he'd help keep things running if I needed time to focus on my health. That night, Megan went out to visit her sister, and Adam ended up staying for a drink. One drink turned into several, and somewhere in the haze of alcohol and emotions, things between us crossed a line I never thought they would. The next morning, I woke up filled with regret. I couldn't believe what I'd done, but I convinced myself it was a one-time mistake, something I could bury and forget. Adam and I didn't talk about it afterward. It was like an unspoken agreement to pretend it never happened. I wanted to focus on my marriage and the time I had left with Megan. But life has a way of ripping the rug out from under you when you least expect it. 2 days later, Megan came home from work unusually quiet. She wouldn't look at me, and when I asked her what was wrong, she pulled out her phone and played a video. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at, but then it hit me like a freight train. It was footage of me and Adam from that night. I was speechless. Megan didn't yell or cry. She just looked at me with this cold, empty expression and said, "How could you do this to me?" Apparently, there was a security camera in the living room that I'd completely forgotten about. Megan had set it up months ago after a neighbor had a break-in, and in my drunken state, it hadn't even crossed my mind. I tried to explain, to apologize, but nothing I said made a difference. She told me she needed time to think and left the house, taking an overnight bag with her. That was 3 days ago. I've tried calling and texting, but she's barely responding. Now I'm sitting here, completely alone, trying to process everything. I've ruined my marriage, my friendship with Adam is in shambles, and I'm facing a terminal diagnosis. I don't know how to fix any of this. I know I screwed up in ways I can't even begin to justify, but I don't know what to do now. Megan hasn't said if she's coming back, and I don't know if I should keep trying to reach out or give her space. Part of me feels like I deserve whatever happens, but another part of me is terrified of spending what little time I have left completely alone. After Megan left, the house felt like a tomb. I spent the first couple of days replaying everything in my head, trying to figure out how things went so wrong. I'd ruined the one thing I thought I could count on, my marriage. Megan hadn't come home, and her texts were short and cold, just enough to let me know she was staying with her sister. I wanted to reach out to her again, to beg for forgiveness, but something stopped me every time. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was the realization that no apology could undo what I'd done. Either way, I knew I had to start thinking about the future, or what little of it I had left. The diagnosis had already made me think about my mortality, but now it felt like a clock was ticking louder than ever. I'd always assumed I had more time. Time to grow old with Megan, to watch my kids, Ellie and Jake, live their lives, maybe even hold my grandkids someday. Now, I wasn't sure I'd even make it to Ellie's college graduation next year. Sitting in the quiet of the house, I started thinking about what would happen when I was gone. Megan and I had always talked about how we'd leave everything to the kids, but now, I didn't know if I could trust her anymore. Not after what I'd done to her. So I made a decision. Instead of confronting Megan or trying to fix things between us right now, I'd focus on making sure my kids were taken care of. The first thing I did was call my lawyer. I explained everything. My diagnosis, the situation with Megan, and what I wanted to do. He didn't ask a lot of questions, which I appreciated. We started working on a new will, one that left everything to Ellie and Jake directly, with specific instructions for how the money should be managed until they were older. I even included provisions for any grandchildren I might never get to meet, just in case. Next, I started transferring control of all the important stuff, bank accounts, property deeds, even my life insurance policy, to people I trusted. My brother, Mark, was the first person who came to mind. He's always been the responsible one in the family, the guy who stepped up when things got hard. I knew he'd do right by the kids, no matter what. Mark was surprised when I told him everything. He knew about the cancer. Megan had called him the day I was diagnosed, but he had no idea about the rest. I could hear the disappointment in his voice when I told him what had happened with Adam, but he didn't lecture me. He just said, "Let's make sure the kids are okay." It felt like I was preparing for the end, even though I wasn't ready to go. But there was a strange sense of relief in knowing that I was doing something productive, something that mattered. It didn't erase the guilt or the fear, but it gave me a small sense of control in a situation where I felt like I had none. As the days passed, I started to feel more and more distant from Megan. She wasn't just physically gone. It was like she'd already made up her mind to move on without me. Part of me wanted to fight for our marriage, but another part of me wondered if it was even worth it. Could she ever forgive me? Could I forgive myself? For now, I'm trying to focus on what matters most. Ellie and Jake. They don't know about any of this yet. All they know is that their dad is sick and that mom is taking some time to process. I don't know how long I can keep the truth from them, but I want to shield them from it for as long as I can. They deserve that much. I know I can't avoid Megan forever, and eventually we'll have to talk. But right now, I'm just trying to put one foot in front of the other and make sure that when I'm gone, the people I love are taken care of. It's the only thing I have left to hold on to. I decided to throw a Christmas party this year. It might sound crazy, given everything going on, but I wanted one last good memory for my family. Something warm, happy, and normal. I needed them to have that, even if it was all a facade. The party wasn't an easy sell. Megan was still staying with her sister, and things were strained, to say the least. When I brought it up during one of our rare phone calls, she hesitated. "You really think it's a good idea?" she asked, her tone flat. "I do," I said. "For the kids. For everyone. It's Christmas, Megan. Let's just put everything aside for one day." She finally agreed, but I could tell she wasn't enthusiastic about it. Still, I pushed ahead. I called Mark and a few other close family members, inviting them to come over for a big Christmas dinner. I made it sound like I just wanted to get everyone together for the holidays, which wasn't entirely untrue. I just didn't mention the part where it might be the last Christmas I'd ever have with them. On the day of the party, the house looked perfect. Ellie and Jake helped me decorate, stringing lights around the living room and hanging ornaments on the tree. I put on some Christmas music, baked cookies, badly, but the kids didn't seem to mind, and did my best to act like everything was fine. When Megan arrived, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. She looked beautiful as always, but there was a distance in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She hugged Ellie and Jake, kissed them on their foreheads, but barely glanced at me. As the night went on, the house filled with laughter and chatter. Mark made everyone laugh with his stories. The kids tore into their presents with the kind of joy only kids can have, and for a few hours it was like nothing had changed. I even caught Megan smiling a few times, though it faded quickly whenever our eyes met. I kept my condition a secret. I didn't want to ruin the mood or overshadow the happiness everyone was feeling. I just wanted this one night to be about family, about love, about Christmas. The next morning, the house was quiet again. Megan had stayed the night, sleeping in the guest room. I wasn't sure if it was out of politeness or guilt, but I was grateful she'd stayed. It made what I had to do next a little easier. After breakfast, I called a family meeting. Ellie and Jake sat on the couch, looking curious and a little nervous. Megan leaned against the wall with her arms crossed, avoiding my gaze. Mark was there too. I'd asked him to stay an extra day because I knew I'd need his support. I took a deep breath and started with the diagnosis. I told them about the cancer, how advanced it was, and what the doctors had said. Ellie burst into tears immediately, and Jake just sat there, staring at me like I just told him the sky was falling. Megan's face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might come to me, but she stayed where she was. "I'm so sorry," I said, my voice cracking. I didn't want to ruin Christmas. I wanted us to have one last good memory together before everything changes. Mark put a hand on my shoulder, his presence grounding me. Ellie and Jake clung to each other, and I felt the weight of my failure as a father. I was supposed to protect them, and now I was leaving them. But there was more I needed to say. I turned to Megan, my heart pounding. "There's something else," I said. Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't say anything. "I made a terrible mistake," I continued, "and you all deserve to know the truth. Megan, I betrayed you. My voice broke, and I forced myself to push through. I had an affair with Adam." The room went silent. Ellie and Jake looked at me like I was a stranger, and Megan's face went pale. "I'm so sorry," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't expect forgiveness. I needed to tell you. I didn't want to leave this world with lies between us." Megan's lips trembled, but she didn't say a word. Ellie ran out of the room, and Jake followed her. Mark stayed, but his face was tight with disappointment. "I need some air," Megan said finally, her voice cold. She walked out of the house without looking back. Now I'm sitting here, writing this, and I feel completely hollow. I wanted to do the right thing, to be honest, to give my family closure. But all I've done is tear them apart. I don't know if I made the right choice. I don't know if Megan will ever forgive me or if my kids will ever look at me the same way again. All I know is that I couldn't leave this world with secrets. I just hope someday they'll understand. I knew the conversation with Megan had to happen, but it was hard to figure out the right way to do it. After everything, the diagnosis, the confession, the fallout, it felt like we were strangers occupying the same orbit. The air between us was cold, heavy with things left unsaid. But I'd made up my mind. There was no salvaging this marriage. What little love had been left between us had been drowned out by the betrayals. Mine, hers, ours. It was time to end it. I invited her to dinner at one of her favorite restaurants, a quiet little Italian place we used to go to on special occasions. I framed it as a chance to talk, to clear the air, and she agreed, though her voice on the phone was clipped and distant. When she arrived, she looked polished, I guess, like she'd put on her armor. Hair perfectly done, makeup just right, wearing the red dress I used to love. It felt like she wanted to make a statement, though I wasn't sure who it was for, me or herself. We ordered, exchanged a bit of small talk, and for a moment it felt almost normal. But I couldn't pretend forever. Once the food came, I put my fork down, took a deep breath and said, "Megan, I need to talk to you about something important." She stiffened slightly but nodded. "I figured as much. I've been doing a lot of thinking," I said, keeping my voice as calm as I could. "About us, about everything that's happened. And I've come to the conclusion that we can't keep going like this." Her eyes flickered with something. Sadness, maybe, or relief. It was hard to tell. "You're talking about a divorce," she said, her tone flat. "Yes," I said. "I've already spoken to my lawyer and had the paperwork drawn up. It's all here." I reached into my bag and pulled out an envelope, sliding it across the table to her. She stared at it for a long moment before picking it up. "You've already decided everything," she said, her voice tight. "I have," I admitted. "This isn't about punishing you or dragging things out. I want this to be clean, simple, and as painless as possible, for both of us." She opened the envelope and flipped through the documents. Her expression hardened as she got to the section where I'd laid out the terms. No alimony, no claims to the house or my assets. Everything was going to Ellie and Jake. "You're cutting me off," she said, her voice cold. "I'm protecting my kids." I said. After what's happened, I can't trust you with anything else. And I think you know why. Her eyes shot up to meet mine, and for the first time I saw real anger there. You're one to talk about trust, John, she snapped. I know what I did, I said, keeping my voice steady. And I've owned up to it. But this isn't about me right now. It's about what you did, Megan. I reached into my bag again and pulled out a second envelope, this one thinner. Inside were photos, printouts of texts, and other evidence of her affair. She froze as I slid it across the table. You've been lying to me for years, I said. I don't know how long it's been going on, but I do know this. I can't spend the rest of my life pretending things are okay. And I won't let you take advantage of me or my kids anymore. Her face turned pale as she glanced at the contents of the envelope. You had me followed, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't need to, I said. You left a trail. She sat back in her chair, clutching the envelope like it was burning her fingers. For a moment, I thought she might throw it back in my face, but she just sat there, staring at me with a mixture of shock and fury. I'll sign the papers, she said finally, her voice low and shaking. Good, I said. And one more thing, I don't want you contacting me anymore unless it's about Ellie or Jake. No calls, no texts, no showing up at the house. We're done, Megan. Her lips tightened, but she nodded. Fine. The rest of the dinner was silent. She barely touched her food, and I didn't bother trying to make conversation. Once the check came, I paid and left, not waiting to see if she followed. When I got home, I sat in the quiet of the living room, feeling both drained and strangely at peace. It wasn't how I'd imagined my life would turn out, but at least I'd taken a step toward closure. Now I just have to figure out what comes next. The fallout from our divorce was immediate and brutal for Megan. At first, I thought she'd come out swinging, angry, vindictive, ready to tear me apart. But what happened was different. Megan had always been the kind of person who thrived on appearances. She loved being the center of attention, the perfect wife, the perfect mom, the woman who had it all together. In our little social circle, she was Queen Bee, always hosting parties, volunteering at the kids' school, rubbing elbows with the right people. But when the truth about our marriage came out, her carefully curated world began to crumble. Word spread fast, as it always does in tight-knit communities. At first, it was just whispers, people speculating about why we'd split up. Megan must have cheated. Or maybe I had. Or maybe the cancer was too much for us to handle. But then someone, probably one of Megan's so-called friends, got their hands on the divorce details and leaked the real story. The affair with Adam, the evidence I'd shown her at the restaurant, it all came out. Suddenly, Megan wasn't the shining example of a successful, happy wife anymore. She was the woman who'd betrayed her dying husband. Her friends started pulling away first. They'd smile politely in public, but the invitations stopped coming. The PTA moms stopped chatting with her during drop-offs, and her phone, which was always buzzing with messages, fell silent. Megan tried to salvage her reputation, but there was no coming back from it. Once the gossip mill starts turning, it's impossible to stop. Her job took a hit, too. Megan worked as a financial advisor, and a good chunk of her client base came from referrals in our social circle. When the rumors started, people began quietly pulling their accounts. They didn't want to be associated with her, or maybe they just didn't trust her anymore. Either way, her commissions plummeted, and she had to scale back her hours. As for Adam, well, that didn't last long either. At first, I thought they'd stay together. Maybe they deserved each other, and the irony wasn't lost on me. But Adam wasn't in it for love. He'd been using Megan for her connections, her status, and the little bit of financial stability she brought to the table. When that evaporated, so did he. I heard through the grapevine that he ended things with her over the phone, cold, calculated, and with no regard for how it would affect her. Megan must have thought she'd found someone who cared about her, someone who'd stick around when the chips were down. Instead, she got a hard dose of reality. Megan reached out to me once after Adam left her. It was a text, short and desperate. John, I need to talk. Please. I didn't reply. What was there to say? Her life had unraveled in a way I wouldn't wish on anyone, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for her. She'd made her choices, just like I'd made mine. Now, we were both dealing with the consequences. The kids have picked up on some of the tension, though I've tried to shield them from most of it. Ellie seems confused about why her mom isn't around as much, and Jake has been more withdrawn lately. Megan sees them when she can, but her visits are sporadic at best. I've started to wonder if she even wants to fight for custody, or if she's just too wrapped up in salvaging what's left of her own life. For now, I'm focusing on the kids and trying to give them some sense of stability. It's not easy, especially with everything else going on, but they're my priority. As for Megan, I don't know what the future holds for her, and honestly, I'm not sure I care anymore. After everything fell apart, I wasn't sure how I'd get through the days, let alone the weeks and months ahead. But something surprising happened. My family and friends, people I thought might drift away or struggle to deal with the reality of my situation, rallied around me in a way I never expected. Mark, my brother, was the first to step up. He practically moved into the house for a while, helping with the kids, making meals, and making sure I had someone to lean on. He didn't try to lecture me about my mistakes or pretend to understand what I was going through. He was just there, and that meant more to me than I could ever express. The kids adjusted slowly, and having Mark around made a huge difference. He took Jake to soccer practice when I was too tired to get out of bed and helped Ellie with her college applications. He became the rock I couldn't be, and I don't know how I would have managed without him. Other friends and family pitched in too. My mom dropped off casseroles and soups, probably enough to feed an army. My cousin Amanda organized a fundraiser for my medical bills, even though I told her I could handle it. It was overwhelming to see how many people cared, how many people were willing to show up for me during my lowest point. And then there was Kelly. Kelly was a family friend, someone Megan and I had known for years. She was always around for holidays and barbecues, the kind of person who quietly made sure everyone was taken care of without making a big deal about it. After the divorce, she started checking in more often, at first with texts and phone calls, and then by stopping by the house to see how I was doing. At first, I thought she was just being polite. People always say they'll be there for you, but most don't follow through. But Kelly, she kept showing up. She'd bring groceries or homemade cookies for the kids. Sometimes she'd sit with me in the living room just talking about normal things, movies, books, the latest ridiculous headlines. She never treated me like I was fragile or like I was just my diagnosis. With her, I felt like a person again. One day, after she dropped off some soup and stayed for coffee, I finally asked her why she was doing all of this. She smiled and said, "Because you've always been there for everyone else. Now it's your turn to let someone be there for you." Her words hit me hard. I hadn't realized how much I'd been trying to shoulder everything on my own, even with all the support I was getting. With Kelly, I felt like I could let my guard down in a way I hadn't been able to with anyone else. Over time, Kelly became a constant in my life. She wasn't just there for me. She was there for Ellie and Jake too. She helped Ellie with her senior project and taught Jake how to bake cookies from scratch, which he absolutely loved. The kids warmed up to her quickly, and I could tell they felt more at ease when she was around. It wasn't long before I started to realize that my feelings for Kelly were shifting. At first, I tried to push them aside, telling myself it was just gratitude or the fact that she'd been such a steady presence during a chaotic time. But the more time we spent together, the harder it became to ignore. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Kelly and I were sitting on the back porch, sipping tea and watching the stars. The air was cool, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt peaceful. "Thank you," I said, breaking the comfortable silence. "For what?" she asked, tilting her head. "For everything," I said. "For being here, for caring, for just being you." She smiled, her eyes soft in the moonlight. "You don't have to thank me, John. I'm here because I want to be." I don't know what came over me, but in that moment, I leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't planned or calculated. It just felt right. When I pulled back, she looked at me with a mix of surprise and warmth, and then she smiled. That night marked the beginning of something new for both of us. I didn't know how much time I had left, but I knew one thing. I wanted to spend it surrounded by the people who truly loved and supported me. Kelly became more than a friend. She became a partner, a confidant, and a source of hope when I needed it most. She reminded me that even in the darkest times, there's still light to be found, and that sometimes, the most unexpected people can become your greatest source of strength. Life hasn't been easy, and I know the road ahead will be difficult. But with Kelly, Mark, my kids, and the rest of my family and friends by my side, I feel like I can face whatever comes next. And for now, that's enough. As the weeks went on, the reality of my situation grew clearer. My energy was fading, and the treatments felt less like a fight and more like a formality. Something to buy me time rather than a solution. I knew my time was running out, and there were things I needed to do before the end. I started with letters. Late at night, when the house was quiet and everyone else was asleep, I'd sit at my desk and write. I wrote one for Ellie, one for Jake, one for Kelly, and a few others for people who'd meant something to me in this life. Ellie's letter was the hardest. I told her how proud I was of the woman she was becoming, how I'd always known she was destined for great things. I told her to chase her dreams, to never settle, and to remember that she was stronger than she knew. I told her I'd be watching over her, cheering her on, wherever life took her. Jake's letter was different but no less heartfelt. He was younger, still figuring out who he was, and I wanted to leave him with advice for the years to come. I told him to be kind, to stand up for what he believed in, and to never be afraid to take risks. I reminded him that family was everything and that he could always count on Ellie and Kelly, even after I was gone. Kelly's letter, that one broke me. I thanked her for everything she'd done for me and the kids, for being a light in the darkest part of my life. I told her she'd brought me a kind of peace I hadn't thought was possible, and I asked her to take care of herself and my children when I couldn't anymore. In addition to the letters, I recorded video messages. I wanted them to hear my voice, to see my face, even years down the line. I didn't want to just vanish from their lives, leaving only memories. The videos were simple but personal birthday wishes, advice for milestones, and reminders that I loved them, always. My final wish was something I'd been planning for months, ever since the diagnosis. I wanted my last days to be spent at the ranch, the one I'd loved and worked on for over 30 years. It wasn't just a place to me, it was a part of who I was. The ranch had been in my family for generations, passed down from my grandfather to my father and eventually to me. Over the years, I'd poured my heart and soul into it, turning it into a place of beauty and comfort. It was where Ellie and Jake had learned to ride horses, where Kelly and I had shared some of our happiest moments, and where I felt most at peace. When the time came, Mark, Kelly, and the kids helped me move out there. It wasn't easy, and I could see the worry in their faces as I grew weaker, but they never let it show. They did everything they could to make me comfortable, filling the house with warmth and laughter. On my last night, we all sat on the porch together, wrapped in blankets and watching the sun set over the fields. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and the air was filled with the sounds of crickets and the soft rustle of the wind through the trees. Ellie and Jake sat on either side of me, their hands in mine. Kelly was next to Ellie, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Mark was there too, quiet and steady as always. "This is perfect," I said, my voice weak but full of gratitude. I couldn't have asked for a better way to say goodbye. The next morning, I passed away peacefully in my sleep. In the days that followed, my family fulfilled my final wish, to have my ashes scattered on the ranch. They chose a spot beneath the old oak tree where I'd spent so many afternoons reading, thinking, and dreaming. Ellie and Jake read their letters aloud as they stood beneath the tree, their voices trembling but strong. Kelly placed a hand on the trunk, whispering something only she could hear. Mark stood a few steps back, his head bowed in quiet reflection. I wasn't there to see it, but I'd like to think they felt my presence, that they knew I was at peace. Now, the ranch belongs to Ellie and Jake. They've promised to take care of it, to keep it as a place of love and family for generations to come. I didn't get as much time as I wanted, but I got enough to say what needed to be said and to leave behind a legacy of love, memories, and hope. That's all I could have asked for. After I passed, The family did exactly what I'd hoped. They came together and made the ranch their home. It wasn't an easy transition for Ellie, Jake, or even Kelly, but they took the step together, united by a shared sense of purpose and love. Ellie had just finished her first semester of college, and moving to the ranch meant she'd have to commute for the rest of the year. At first, she was hesitant, worried it would disrupt her studies. But when she looked out over the fields and saw the place that had meant so much to us as a family, she decided it was worth the sacrifice. She said, "This place is a part of us, Dad. I'll do whatever it takes to keep it alive." Jake took to ranch life immediately. He was always the outdoorsy one, and having the chance to help run the place made him light up in a way that Kelly said reminded her of me. He started spending his mornings with the horses, afternoons fixing fences or clearing brush, and evenings telling stories about his adventures over dinner. Kelly became the glue that held everything together. She managed the logistics of running the ranch, balancing that with taking care of Ellie and Jake, and somehow found time to breathe new life into the place. She planted new gardens, renovated the barn, and even started a small bed and breakfast on the property for weekend guests. It wasn't just a home, it was a thriving sanctuary. Megan, on the other hand, was nowhere in sight. When the divorce was finalized, she lost all rights to the ranch, the house, and the property. The court upheld the terms of the will and our agreements, and there was nothing she could do about it. For the first time in years, Megan had to face the consequences of her choices. From what I heard, she tried to fight back at first, claiming she was entitled to more. But the evidence of her affair and her poor financial decisions made her case weak, and the judge wasn't swayed by her arguments. In the end, she walked away with almost nothing. After the dust settled, Megan drifted away. She made a few half-hearted attempts to reach out to Ellie and Jake, but they didn't respond. I think they needed time to heal, to come to terms with everything that had happened. Megan stopped trying after a while, and the kids didn't seem to miss her absence. For my family, the ranch became a place of healing and growth. They spent their days working the land, sharing meals, and building a life that honored the values I tried to instill in them. Ellie often said that living on the ranch made her feel closer to me. She'd sit under the old oak tree where my ashes were scattered and tell me about her day, about her dreams for the future. Jake, too, found comfort in the routine of ranch life, saying it gave him a sense of purpose he hadn't felt before. Kelly was the heart of it all. She kept the family grounded, making sure Ellie and Jake stayed on track with their goals, while also encouraging them to embrace the beauty of their surroundings. She was tireless, selfless, and everything I could have hoped for as the person who would carry on my legacy. Over time, the ranch became more than just a home. It became a symbol of resilience, love, and the enduring strength of family. It was a place where they could honor the past while building a future together, one that I knew would be filled with joy, laughter, and memories. Even though I wasn't there to see it, I felt at peace knowing that the people I loved most were thriving, united in a common life and purpose. My legacy wasn't just the ranch or the letters I left behind. It was the love and strength that lived on in my family. That was all I'd ever wanted.